Welcome to It Takes All of Us, a NAMI Talks podcast hosted by the suicide prevention team at NAMI Maine. Our mission is to provide education and guidance to assist in suicide prevention, to encourage intervening with those at risk, and to support people in the aftermath of a suicide or traumatic loss. We deeply believe that suicide prevention works and is most effective when people have the knowledge, the skills, and the confidence to open up the conversation with someone at risk and connect them with help. It takes all of us to save lives. This podcast often addresses topics of suicide to include suicide loss and can be emotionally unsettling to some. If you or someone you know is in crisis or struggling with suicidal thoughts, please call the Maine Crisis Line at 1-888-568-1112 or text 988 to reach the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline.
Welcome to It Takes All of Us. My name is Joyce Morrisette. I'm the clinical suicide prevention trainer here at NAMI Maine. And in this special episode, we will be focusing on the workplace, which encompasses workplace suicide prevention, mental health promotion, and worker well-being. And to discuss all of this, I am so honored to be joined by Dr. Sally Spencer-Thomas, who is a pioneer in workplace suicide prevention. I really respect her work, and she's also a friend to Maine. So what I mean by that is Sally has been a past keynote speaker at our Beyond the Basics Suicide Prevention Conference, and she's also lived in Maine when she was a student at Bowdoin College, which is not far from here. So hi, Sally, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Joyce. It's so exciting to be here. And not only me, but my father and our middle son, also Bowdoin graduates. We are that family. Lots and lots of time in Maine. We love it.
Oh, I didn't know that. How cool. Very good. So let's dig in and get started. Could you please introduce yourself to us and include your background, as well as what prompted you to be working in the field of suicide prevention?
Sure. So I'm a clinical psychologist by training, been in the field a long time. And I'd probably been a practicing psychologist for 12 years and in the field of mental health for 16-ish when my younger brother and only sibling died by suicide on December 7th, 2004. And like many people listening, that was my before and after moment. My life before his death and my life after his death were very different. You see, as a psychologist, I thought I knew a thing or two about suicide. And, I actually remember back to my graduate school days, and I did feel underprepared. My very first conference as a graduate student was I would say suicide curious conference, not even suicide prevention, because it didn't offer much in the realm of prevention. My very first research project was with the Denver Police Department investigating police officers' response to civilian suicide. This all predates my brother's death. And I did an externship on my internship at the Boston VA Medical Center to try to understand how to address the crisis of suicidal despair. And from all of that, I learned a thing or two about risk assessments, which I now know are not that useful, and how to document so that I wouldn't get sued, but not a lot on how to actually help somebody. So after Carson's death, there was this big aha moment for, his closest friends and our family as we pulled together in our grief and try to figure out, what are we going to do? How are we going to live through this? How are we going to try to turn this into something meaningful? And we went searching for answers on what are we missing. And I learned a lot more after. And what I learned was that the majority of people who die by suicide are working age. They often die on first attempt. Most of them are working aged men who have never stepped foot in any type of mental health, nothing. There we go. We got to figure out how to help these guys and all the people dying by suicide. But that statistic really caught our eye. So where are they? They're out of the education system. They're not in the healthcare system, actually, very often, but they're working. They're working almost every day. So that's how we got to the workplace as being the most cross-cutting system we have for suicide prevention.
Thank you. So, thank you for all of that and for sharing your lived experience that you're a suicide loss survivor. And we're going to dive deeper into workplace suicide prevention. I wanted to just tease out a little bit because, of course, like you, there are many suicide loss survivors as well in the workplace. And I know you've been a leader, Sally, in United Suicide Survivors International. Could you just tell our listeners what the heart of that work is too? And then we'll go into the workplace.
Yeah. So again, Carson died '04. And my very first suicide prevention conference after that was '07. Took me a while to get my feet back under me. And then I showed up and they, you go up to the registration desk to get your badge and your packets. And they said, well, what are you? Are you a researcher? Are you a clinician? Are you a loss survivor? And I said, I don't know. I guess I'm all three. And they said, well, go pick up your ribbons over there on the ribbon table. And when I went over there, I noticed there weren't any ribbons for suicide attempt survivors. And I went back and I said, well, why are there loss survivor ribbons and not attempt survivor ribbons? And I kid you not, the response was like, well, we couldn't have those people here because those people would require all kinds of crisis intervention and we just don't have the bandwidth. And I said, you're kidding me, right? Of course you have suicide attempt survivors here. No one gets into this work for the fame and the money. We all get in here because we've been personally touched. And so there was a lot of people that felt the same. And eventually we found each other and started to organize. So United Survivors is really about lifting up the voices of people who have any form of lived experience, loss, attempts, thoughts, or caregiving, to make systems and cultural change with the wisdom of what it feels like to live through those things.
Mm, thank you. So, in your introduction, I want to also ask you to not be shy. And as we talk about your work, I would love for you to please highlight some of the innovative initiatives that you have really co-created. So, in construction working minds, and man therapy, which I know has won awards. Um, Maybe hopefully we'll move into you being a lead author of national guidelines for workplace suicide prevention. So could you highlight for us some of your achievements and things that you have really done to really, as a pioneer, set so many things in motion?
Well, of course, all of these things take a huge team. Sometimes there's just the willingness of people to listen, and then there's a huge team of people to come behind that effort. So, luckily for us with Man Therapy, it was a full collaboration from the start with the state of Colorado, the Public Health Department of Colorado, and their Office of Suicide Prevention, and a full service advertising agency called Cactus, that we said we have to do something differently. Like all the traditional messages of you're depressed, seek help are not hitting this demographic that's dying. So that's where Man Therapy was born out of the creative geniuses at Cactus. And today it's still going. We launched that bad boy in 2013. It's still going strong. Licensed to a lot of states. We licensed it to the country of Australia. We've created versions for veterans and active duty military, for first responders, for construction, and we even have a campaign for healthcare systems. So I love Man Therapy. It's radically different. We also had a randomized control trial that was published in 2022, 23, that showed that it does have an impact in bringing people in that don't normally seek help. They stay a long time on those website pages, and they are more likely to seek help after. So we're very, very pleased with all of those results. The national guidelines for workplace suicide prevention, I know we'll dig into a little more here, but that was a labor of love of a huge community of people. We started looking at Australia had a position statement that came out in 2013. Canada had official psychological health and safety standards for workplace, also came out around the same time. And we're like, gosh, we're behind. We got to get caught up. But it took us a long time. And finally, in 2019, our huge team, and all of the focus groups and interviews and surveys that we did over the course of 2 years, all of that data, all of that effort pulled together to publish those guidelines in 2019.
Mm.
And then construction working minds has also been a huge labor of love. That's actually where I spend most of my time today. Is if you're not in the construction industry, you probably don't have any idea about how large the industry is, how complex it is. Well, of course, you would probably realize how essential it is when things go wrong, and you're like, where are the roads? Why did that bridge fall? And then like your world is turned upside down when construction's not working well. But what I love about construction is they're problem-solving people.
Mm,
And when they learned that they had a elevated risk of suicide, addiction, and overdose, they started going to work immediately on what can we do to make a difference and save these lives, and really go beyond that, really help people live life worth living. And so I
mhm.
love working with the construction partners that we have, unions, corporate employers, professional associations, even some of the owners of some of the data centers that are driving a lot of the large builds around our nation. It's just a wonderful, wonderful community to work.
Wow. That's a lot. So our listeners probably know that males have higher rates of suicide, but some people don't know that certain professions and industries have higher risks. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that. And want to tell people that we actually feature man therapy on our website here at NAMI Maine. So we're proud to highlight that work. And I love hearing about the collaboration around the guidelines that all of you came together to bring this work forward. So, could you please speak, Sally, to what are some of the guiding principles of a workplace suicide prevention program that's comprehensive?
Yeah, so that was one of the first things that we did. And we did to speak to the United Suicide Survivors International True North. From
Mm-hmm.
the inception, we were engaging people with lived experience. So, a lot of our in-depth interviews, our focus groups were made up of disclosed people with lived experience and non-disclosed, helping us shape these to be very relevant and impactful.
Mm-hmm.
And so the eight guiding principles are things that are, I hope, reflective of those voices.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that came out was that it really needed to be a strategic integration. People are tired of the one-offs, the one-off training, the one-off suicide awareness day. You put your focus on it for a second and you check a box and you feel good, you did something, but that's not going to move a needle. And so we really need to have people think about, how do you bake it in? As my friend David Covington says, bake it in, don't bolt it on. Bake it into things you're already doing in the area of health and safety. Understand what those practices, policies, and protocols are, and then weave this in so that it doesn't become an extra thing that people need to do, but it is aligned with these other core values of most organizations to keep their workers safe and healthy. So that's a big one. Another one was, and this is one that I always like to pull out. I'm not gonna be able to probably go through all eight
Yeah.
today, but
Okay.
what I like to pull out is that harm reduction. So it's not all about getting so-called troubled workers to counselors. But a lot of times if employers have a mental health program, pretty much they have an employee assistance program or an EAP, and they think their only job is to provide that benefit. They've done their due diligence and they're going back to making widgets or whatever it is. And that's not what these guidelines are about. We say, yes, sometimes people have mental health conditions or they've had a major trauma and they need support from mental health professionals, but that's about half the story. The other half of the story when it comes to suicide is we have some toxic environments that are driving distress and despair. And so it's the employer or the union or the professional association's responsibility to also understand what those psychosocial hazards are and work to reduce those, because we have clear evidence in the international literature that the more psychosocial hazards we have, like poor job design, lack of autonomy, lack of variety, effort reward imbalance, lots of disruption in interpersonal relationships, bullying, hazing, harassment, toxicity with your supervisor, work life disruption, trauma on the job, sleep disruption on the job. All of these job related things are directly connected to suicide. You don't have to have any other variables in there like depression or addiction. Nothing. When we control for all of those mental health condition variables, there are still lots of things that are happening at work that are driving suicidal despair. And so that's another big guiding principle that we're trying to have people think about, how they can either eliminate it or mitigate it.
Thank you so much. I mean, that was what drew me to your work actually earlier this year, was listening to your podcast on this international podcast around worker related negative outcomes. And I um, just so appreciated that there was attention being paid to that. So thank you. I want to talk about a new initiative, the Hope certification that you are involved in. But first, could you say anything about, okay, so people are coming together to do this work. What are some of the barriers around implementing workplace suicide prevention?
Yeah, I think probably the true barrier across all things that, I mean, we started promoting this work in 2007 and we got a lot of deer in the headlights, or even I would say slam doors. Like, this is not our lane. We make widgets, or whatever is the mission of the company. This is way too scary. You know, the scary liability monster hiding in the closet. We're not doing it. 'Cause so hard to get traction. I think we're in a different place 20 years later, but there's still a lot of fear that this
Yep.
is life and death. It is something that only professionals who have high level of credentials should be doing, and not ours to do, right? So this huge fear that makes us self-protective.
Mm-hmm.
And then I say, so are you also cardiologists? Are you oncologists?
Mm-hmm.
No, you're not. You make widgets, but yet you still train your people in CPR. You promote, healthy eating. You do all these upstream things as part of your work, life, because a healthy and happy employee is the right thing to do and makes a better productive employee and
Yeah, that's a good
more,
point.
more connected, right? So it's still fear, largely. And then even after we get people to do like a first step of buy-in, they have a hard time figuring out how to prioritize it. So we get the usual, leaders are focused on other parts of the mission, or we don't have money, or we don't have time. And that's all. This is just not a priority yet.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, the ones that are often coming to the door first and most passionately are still in reactive mode. They have lost somebody, and they've lost somebody that was just a mission critical key person in the community. The
Mm-hmm.
loss is felt greatly. And so we saw this also with schools,
Yes.
15, 20 years ago, where they would only come forward if there had been a loss. And now schools are more proactive. So I have all the hope in the world that we will get to that place. But right now it's still pretty reactive.
Yeah. So I've observed the same. Now, speaking of hope, can you briefly tell us, because I am interested in any implementation. So, hope
Yes.
certification, I know that you have, um, this is unfolding and you've piloted this project. So, could you tell our listeners a little bit about what this is about? What does the acronym even stand for, and a brief description?
So it stands for helping our people elevate. That's the hope part, elevate through tough times. And so we launched the national guidelines for workplace suicide prevention on World Mental Health Day, October 2019. And of course, we all know what happened after that. The world exploded and everybody was interested in somebody's mental health. And there was a lot of fear in that, especially in the early days of the pandemic, a lot of fear about suicide. So all of a sudden, like, everybody wanted handholds about what do you do? What do you do? How do you help your kids? How do you help your workers? And
Yep.
we had been around, right? So all of a sudden people were hungry for the content. And we quickly found out like just having guidelines wasn't enough. So we then created a self-paced online, you know, pledge program. And nope, still not enough. People were still too scared. So
Yep.
that's why Hope came forward. And we like people to think about it as kind of like LEED certification, where you could earn bronze, silver, gold, platinum.
Yeah.
For a green company, it's the same kind of idea. It's an organizational level certificate,
Mm-hmm.
um, where we take a deep dive. It's a full year, 4 full-day modules, a graduation, like an evaluation, deliverables, formal certification process. Like it's I call it third level stuff. When you get beyond awareness and you get beyond just training skills, if your organization's ready for actual systems and cultural change to move the needle, we are here for you. So yes, we scaled. We started in New York, then we had a second pilot in Colorado, and now we're scaling. So hopefully, Maine will be next on our short list of states to come to, because it's beautiful. We create a community of practice. Different industries coming together, learning from one another, and over the course of the year, they implement 9 different practices, each having a bunch of deliverables under them, and you start to see this real cultural shift in the organization. It's phenomenal. It's like one of the best things I've ever gotten to do.
I love hearing this. Thank you. And I want to tell everyone that's listening, Sally has so many online robust resources. So you can read more about this. I mean, she has white papers and executive summaries and toolkits and podcasts and blog posts and guidelines. So we will have links to all of this. And I wondered if, as we're getting closer to wrapping up, if you could share a couple of tools and maybe resources for people who are interested in the workplace and what you'd point them to.
I'm going to call out two. One is we have a quick start guide. So if you're not in a place to start a certification cohort or just sounds like too much, we've distilled, like if you're going to choose just a couple of things to get started, that's beyond an awareness day, we've got you. All right, so we'll put those in the show notes, the quick start guide to implementing the national strategy for workplace suicide prevention. And then the other piece that I want to highlight, again, putting my United Survivors hat on, is the power of storytelling. We have lots of brain science that shows us that we're wired for stories, and storytelling around suicide is the best tool that we have for decreasing the othering that happens a lot in this work. So we have an online series of courses at United Survivors that helps people first think through, am I ready to tell my story? Is that the right thing for me to do? What's my why? How do I prepare myself? Who am I telling it to? And then if all those are green lights and we say, okay, we got you, we're going to help you make a powerful and impactful story that's good for you to tell. Our storytellers are always our priority, and also good for your listeners and for culture change. So I know NAMI also has beautiful storytelling courses. Ours are specifically for the suicide survivors, loss, thought, and attempt. And so, it's great work.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned this, and it might have come up when we talked before this podcast that even at the Surgeon General level, when he launched the national strategy earlier this year, spoke of, having a suicide in his family. And so it's also deactivating stigma, and so love that. So finally, would you be willing to tell us what you see as being next on the horizon?
Well, I look to Australia. Australia, I always say, is 15, 20 years ahead of us. They have fully centered all of their work on suicide prevention around the wisdom of people with lived experience. So you can't get a grant unless you're co-designing your research project with people with lived experience all the way through. What questions to ask, all of that, how to design it, how to understand the results, how to disseminate the findings, all of that. You can't develop a program. Every time I go over there to present, the very first question I get asked is, so how did you center this work on lived experience? I'm like, I have some. And also we did a bunch of other things. Yeah. So and so I see that happening. It's just slower. We got a lot of territorialism here around who owns suicide prevention. But I see it coming just because of who's in leadership now. And then I do see on the horizon that this is the uptick around workplace stuff is going to continue to happen. We've got an incoming generation of workers that are fluent around things like mental health. I know my kids who are now in their 20s in preschool, they were taking social and emotional learning as part of their curriculum. So, it's stuff that they've just always, it's the air they breathe. And so they're going to demand it. And so workplaces will not survive if they're not getting up to speed around really appreciating the whole person and being there when people are really brought to their knees with mental health challenges and life circumstances. So I can still continue to do that, to grow and expand as people embrace it and understand their role in it.
Yes. Thank you so much. Wow. I feel like you have such an integrative blend of experience and expertise, and really want to thank you for this conversation, which could have gone on much longer. But thank you so much, Sally, for your innovative work that has inspired me. And I want everyone to check out the links in the show notes to highlight Sally's work and resources where you can learn more. And I want to thank listeners, too, for tuning in to this episode of It Takes All of Us, because suicide prevention does work when we all do our part. And if you've enjoyed the podcast, please consider subscribing and sharing it. And from our team, the Suicide Prevention Team, until the next episode, please be well. And thank you.